Welcome back, of course, the morning update on WFEA. Check us out, 1370WFEA.com. Of course, you get the archives over there as well. We're going to be discussing this next story. Many people have been thinking about when we look at this conflict approaching its third week. Iran war oil crisis teaches us a valuable lesson. That's the name of the article from our next guest. Of course, Kevin Dayaratna joins us, of course. Dayaratna, thank you, sir. Vice President, Center for Statistic Modeling and Scientific Analysis, one of the great titles of this week, and certainly an indicator who's the smarter person in this conversation. When we think about that, Kevin, some people, instinctively, and you kind of point this out at the beginning of your article, some people ran to the fight. Well, what is this going to do to energy costs? There is a concern with that, and your article brings out a lot of great analysis, but also reminders of where we've seen this before. Your initial, when you look at where the impact is right now with this conflict, what were some of the things you want to make sure people understand?
Well, yeah, so it's a great question, and this conflict is a classic case study in what to think about in the broader context of energy, especially American energy, and global energy in general, is that these types of conflicts, they're going to happen every couple of years. They're inevitable, and I don't necessarily mean a military conflict, but I would say some sort of geopolitical change or a shock that could impact energy prices and impact energy supply. And as a result, it's fundamentally important to realize that energy is the fundamental building block of society. And it's important to have access to affordable and reliable energy and not be dependent on particular localities if and when situations like this arise.
Well, and one of the things that pointed out, we've heard this over and over, Kevin, certainly from the corporate media, they talk about, 20% of the world's oil supply goes through the Straits. From that region. And that's somewhat of a misleading percentage, though, when we look at how it breaks down and who are the recipients of that oil. When you hear that being talked about, what are some of the things that you like to tell people that we should be mindful of when we talk about that 20% and who is actually receiving that oil?
Yeah, so, throughout the world, there are impacts as a result of what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz. But I think the bottom line is, on President Trump's first day, he issued his Unleashing American Energy executive order, leveraging our vast oil and gas supply as well as other forms of energy, to basically, firstly, increase our supply of energy and our access to affordable and reliable energy, and more fundamentally, protect us against shocks like this, where when there are restrictions as a result of, let's say, military conflict or other things, we are protected against any shocks that may occur. Oil and gas prices, have gone up. But the bottom line is our access to energy here at home enables them to stay stable.
And we've had a most recent conflict too, Kevin. When we look at what happened in Ukraine and Russia, a lot of people are unaware of the fact that is a oil-rich or energy-rich area as well. So we have something to fall back on to understand how the markets responded and may have over-responded to that conflict as well.
Exactly. So I was actually, and I think I mentioned this in the op-ed at the Washington Examiner, I was actually speaking about this in Budapest as well, because there's a different context there. Yes, so there was a different conflict at the time, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but Europeans are pushing toward heavy decarbonization. And the bottom line is, the sun doesn't shine all the time, and there isn't, wind all the time to power these wind turbines and so forth. So you need backup, forms of energy that are actually reliable. And if you are dependent upon a rogue nation, which was the case at the time, then there can be major consequences in terms of energy prices. So that itself was a separate case study. And that, again, underscores the need for affordable and reliable energy and to not be dependent on rogue nations. And fortunately, that shifted the geopolitical balance in terms of being able for these countries to access energy, because we at the time had a reasonable supply, and we still do, of oil and gas, and it changed the geopolitical dynamics of where they were getting it from.
Well, the other thing, too, Kevin, is that, this is something that as more and more people have looked at how this conflict has played out, the markets don't just respond to the actual supply. There's a lot of other factors that they look at in general, this conflict, but they also look at what happens after the conflict as well, as it relates not just to supply, but other factors, geopolitical factors in that region and other regions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but again, yes, there are myriads of factors that are at play here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can see price changes all the time in terms of this as well as other, commodities in the market. But again, the point I want to underscore is that if energy is abundant, then firstly, this fundamental building block of society, energy, becomes less expensive, and it is more protected against shocks like this.
Yes.
So we don't really have to suffer the consequences as much when these prices do go up. They will go up from time to time, but access to affordable and reliable energy will mitigate these types of shocks.
Once again, Advancing American Freedom, Kevin Dayaratna, of course, Vice President, Center for Statistical Modeling and Scientific Analysis. I love that title. That is just a brilliant title, by the way. Kevin, before I let you go, you look at this in the bigger sense, but it also brings up a time for us to have a conversation again about, if not for even this past year, if not for some of the actions taken under this administration, and many allies have been hoping more about us becoming independent ourselves as a country, we would be in much different shape and much dire shape if this conflict happened, had we not taken some of the steps we have under not only executive orders but other policies as well.
That's exactly the point that I'm trying to make. The shale oil and gas revolution has fundamentally changed the geopolitical landscape for the better. And we are very blessed to have the resources that we do here as well as elsewhere in North America. And we really need to take advantage of these resources to continue to provide us and the world with plentiful energy. I think many people don't seem to realize that energy is the basic building block, the central building block of society, and it needs to be plentiful and abundant for us to be able to thrive.
Absolutely. Once again, hey, any final thoughts before we let you go, Kevin?
I think, again, I made the point a bunch of times, but energy is central to society, so we need to make sure we have access to it. And then there are all these, concerns that people have about CO2 emissions and how certain forms of energy, particularly oil and gas, will negatively impact the climate and exacerbate global warming. But we run the numbers at Advancing American Freedom, and the climate impacts are going to be negligible. Even if the United States were to completely decarbonize, there would be less than 0.24 degrees Celsius temperature mitigation by the end of the century, a trifling amount. And, in New Hampshire specifically, it would be minuscule. So the bottom line is New Hampshire should leverage as much energy as it can, all forms of energy, and they should be able to compete on a level playing field and let the best ones win.
No, absolutely, and I'm sure most Granite Staters are happy to hear that. That's exactly the policies we put in place as well. Kevin, great stuff. We'll post the article up online. Also, other stuff that you've done as well. I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to find out a little bit more about you. Thanks for joining us, and we'll chat with you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Outstanding. Once again, we post that information up, and Kevin's done an awful lot of work in a lot of different areas too. And I think one of the things that when we look at Advancing American Freedom, being able to have access to these types of experts that talk a little bit about that. And he mentioned, we were talking about the situation in the Middle East. We were talking about, what we should be thinking about as far as the conflict. But he did bring up, the whole conversation. I don't know if we talk about global warming anymore and we talk about the climate issue. I know some people still talk about that, but as more and more data and more evidence comes forward, that once again, the enemy isn't necessarily the fossil fuels. But it is, once again, our ability to go ahead and have that conversation about energy and where we expect to go as far as the bigger conversation on energy policy as well. I will say this one thing is that this conflict has really put Europe, once again, way back on its heels because when you look at some of the countries, not necessarily France, but when you look at some of the countries like Germany, they completely ran away from fossil fuels for all the wrong reasons, and they drove very heavily towards green technology, and they're the ones hurting right now, which is why I'm surprised why they're not helping us keep the Strait open, because they're the recipients of most of the oil. Asia's the other recipient of most of the oil coming out of that area. I think that I heard the stat this morning that about 1% of what we use here in this country is coming from that region, simply because we have done so much to make ourselves energy independent in the way that we've approached it, especially in this last year and a half. Let's go and take a break. We'll come back. We'll close out this half hour right here on the Morning Update.